Okay, you ready to go?
All right, thank you. I'd like to call this RFP Selection Committee for Guaranteed Basic Income to order pursuant to City Ordinance 64102 and 3. I will take the roll. Ms. Garmendia,
Here.
Mr. Sykes,
Here.
Ms. Kyung,
Here.
Mr. Anderson,
Here.
and Mr. Lane. I am here. Second order of business, discussion of the financial distribution partner RFP. So I'll turn it over to you, James, to lead that.
Yeah, so I received all of the score sheets from everyone here. And so if you'd like, I can go ahead and share a quick summary sheet for the proposals that I've sent out to everyone. Please bear with me and I'll share screen. And while I do that, this is a continuation of the discussion we had last week. I mentioned just covering a few important high-level things for each of the proposals. Can everyone see that? Thumbs up.
Yep.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I really wanted to just summarize for all the proposals, what distribution options exist, if there's a transaction fee. Some are a little bit unclear about where the transaction fee existed, so I took some notes on what that kind of looked like and what details they provided. Costs associated, and then their customer service descriptions. I'll start, I guess, at the top, just for us to talk about the distribution options for each of them. If anyone had anything that they wanted to make note of or they thought was important for each of these.
Well, thanks. Wish you'd done this earlier, but I do really like it, being able to see across to really compare the providers. I think just for the distribution options, you can see that everyone offers ACH, so like that's not a determining factor. And just the the reloadable card, like that's consistent across. So it's really like, okay, you can see like where a provider is above the norm.
Yeah, and to our point last week, Beam and Relevate seem to have a lot of different options, which is nice. But yeah, all of them offer what we at minimum require. And I think it's important to note that all of them suggested or seem to prefer to do a reloadable card. Where I see a big difference, and it wasn't clear in our discussion last week, was the transaction fee. So that's the thing that I wanted us to just be able to review and discuss if we had any thoughts about it. And I'll just have this here for us to go over.
Well, I guess going on the options, and I don't know if this was discussed last week since I wasn't there, but I know that, well, I think there's, I'll just pull up mine because I was about to start scrolling on yours, but I think there's a, I don't know if it's like a link factor between distribution options and the box that you have. I'm just forgetting the terminology, the data collection piece. So I don't, I guess that would be a question that I have. I think I could assume the answer, but I don't want to assume. But if we were to go back and ask questions, obviously there are, in terms of tracking and what we get data from, and what we're looking to get data on, depending on the method, the data that we get is probably going to be different. So thinking about what that link factor is. So good to have options, of course, but I think that's more of a program execution question. But it's good to, I would say in my review of the applications, that's one thing I was looking at. Like, it's great to have the options, but if some of those options don't necessarily get us the data that we are intending to collect. How
Yeah,
high-
just to follow up on that. I mean, we did talk about this a little bit last time. For this particular program, I think the emphasis is on that it's a pilot, and the overall intention of the pilot is to provide data that shows that universal basic income programs are something that we should do at a federal level. So big picture, we need to collect data. But at the same time, we're going to be helping 440 families. And so the usability of the funds is definitely like a factor, but it's not the most important factor given the overall purpose of this project. So obvious, I think, for example, if a person wants to be able to pay their rent, they will likely not be able to do that with a card, right? And if they pay their rent in cash, then, or if they pay their rent through a direct deposit, but like, it's just, if we want the study to be truly reflective of what would people do if they had an extra $500 a month, like how they would spend it, like, a lot of families would spend it on rent, like, so, when we have just the debit card option, it's not a true measure of how people would really use the money, because it'll be limited to what they can buy with a card. So I think the downside is it's less trackable if people are taking out money through an ATM, but that's why we have the evaluation partner, and why it's important that they actually have conversations with participants, why they have surveys and focus groups, because they're not going to be able to get all the information from the spending data. So I think there's definitely pros and cons to limiting ourselves to a debit card. You'll get better quality data, but you'll have a false narrowing of how the money would be able to be used. So you're going to see people spending it on food or luxuries, when in reality, they might decide, if they had an extra $500 a month, they might choose to upgrade where they live and spend more of it on rent. So, so I think having the options is important. And I don't think we should do our study just with only using a debit card.
Yeah, I also think though, if someone's using a card and it offsets an expense elsewhere, they could still be, with that extra income, be using their other income for rent. And I think that there's a way, if this offsets other expenses, then it would still be assisting them in paying rent. And I think that our data evaluators will just have to,
be aware of that.
yeah.
Asking those questions, so I think when we have the whole team together, I think they'll have to talk together about the limitations of doing the pilot, and what kind of questions will we have to ask qualitatively.
Yeah, to your point though, you're right. We wouldn't have empirical spending data that says that they're using this specific $500 for rent. Yeah.
And I completely get what you're both saying, and I can clarify. So I understand, overstand, and agree. I was just, I guess stepping back, I was more so from a rating standpoint. So for example, like, let's say there's this great data tracking software called, I don't know, Atlas or whatever. And, they can use it in one of the, I was more so speaking to just the maybe some of the subjectivity with the scoring that I would provide in the link between the data collection piece and what's offered. Because if I have this Atlas software, which is really good, but it's really only good if I use the not ACH, the debit card. And then let's say 439 of them say, well, we want ACH. Then it's like, well, my struggle was, okay, well, on the data piece, would we be giving a really high value on that because they have it, even if it's not going to be used? But, these are all just hypotheticals. But definitely understand that we're dealing with humans and people with different situations. So, having the options allows them to choose what's best for them.
And that itself is a data point.
Mhm.
So, when we're talking about basic income pilots, like that's going to be a data point. If we offer a choice, that's a finding. What did people prefer? So yeah, I think I do think having flexibility is, I definitely get your point. I'm like, hey, how much flexibility do we really need? Do we really need to give so many extra points to people that offer a bajillion options of payment, but we're not going to use any of them?
Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to just touch base on the fees.
Oh, I can pull it back up.
Yeah, the
As
fees.
soon as you said it.
So they all said, in network versus out of network.
Yeah,
I hate that when it's in like a health insurance context. I hate it here because what's in network? Like,
Right.
is it so US Bank? Is it only US Bank? There, one says Wells Fargo, Allpoint ATMs. Like, I don't know what kind of ATMs are in places that people would like in a 7-Eleven. Like, I don't know what kind of ATM is in there. So that's just like, it made it a little hard for me to evaluate this because I don't have that kind of knowledge of, well, what, it is 100% of people's feasible charges going to be this no fee option because they're going to be in network, or are we really saying like, hey, there's going to be some people who are trying to access ATM cash that will be paying a $3 fee or whatever it is every time that they want to pull out cash. So because they do it at their local 7-Eleven and not at a bank. I don't know. So it was a little hard for me to evaluate the fee thing, but obviously no fees better. Or smaller fees for out of network is better, I guess, but it's just hard to tell a little. Maybe the treasurers in this group could.
So I was seeing it as so it really just depends on what contract relationships that bank or fiscal partner has. So again, could be a question that we ask, can you lay out what all your in-network banks are, or a thing where, whichever one we select, just being able to notify our folks like these are the banks that you can go to, and making sure that there are options. So maybe it's not every bank that they can go to that's in network or fee-free, but the ones that are fee-free, just making those known on the forefront so those are the ones that they use. I think also it could be a negotiation point where that fiscal partner could potentially eat those out of network fees and offer that as a pro bono cost during negotiation.
Oh, okay.
But I would say those would probably be two ways. I think the easiest way would probably be to figure out what are all your in networks and what does that map look like for St. Louis from an accessibility standpoint, and being able to go from there. And again, it could be a thing. I've seen this happen with some of the banks that we work with, because we have 13 different partner banks. Could be a case where let's say, just for example, that there's a regions that's really accessible in one part of the city where there is a gap in the in-network provided banks. being able to contact them and saying, if someone is using this card at this bank, can we make sure that there are no fees? So we have some options and possibilities there, but I think that's a great point to dive into and get clarity on.
All right, now you can scroll.
The only thing I'll add is I think in addition to fees, replacement cards, like I don't think that should take out of the $500. That's probably something that should just come out of the administration budget or another bucket of dollars that's not the money that's distributed to recipients.
Yeah, I do think we should plan on cards being lost.
Yep.
Just
Totally.
the nature of life.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really didn't like, there's the ones that charge no fee to us, but we're going to charge fees to our card holders. I did not, and then there's the one that was like, oh, we'll bill the vendor. And I was like, I don't like that. Like, where we have a budget. As far as customer service, I think I was trying to think of like, how much of the customer service is going to be coming through the financial partner versus our implementation partner, versus calling the treasurer's office. Like, what's the extent of customer service that we anticipate needing?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think off the bat, I kind of think that all parties will know that if it has anything to do with the card services or transfer of funds or receipt of funds, then they'll have a person to reach out to that's on the financial distribution partner team, or whatever 24/7 hotline that they use. They'll all have that number. But to your point, I think it depends on what the party, the recipient would have questions about or need support with.
Yeah, I do think like there's going to be a pretty good chance that people are going to, if they have a problem with their funds, they're going to call the number on the card, and when really the problem might be with us. And so is the partner here going to know, like, this is one of the challenges I see with the Relia card option from US Bank. They have, and Conduit, they have so many other customers that if a St. Louisan were to call in that's enrolled in our pilot and they're having a problem, like, they're not going to know that they're in our pilot, and they'll think it's a card problem. They might not know to send them to us.
Mhm.
So that's one of my concerns with some, these bigger providers that don't specialize in GBI and are just using an existing like card program that they have. That's one of my concerns with that element, is that they're not going to have, they have so many customers, so many, that they're not going to be able to distinguish between our pilot participants and other people.
Same.
I also had an intern look at their websites too, because you can say like, hey, we have 24/7 support, but if like you were to go on their website, how easy is it to find? And he had generally good things to say about most of the providers, except for one. So I scored that one lower. Okay, let's see. Was there another category that you went across, James? Oh, data collection.
Yep.
Yeah.
Data collection. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one thing to note here was that transaction data for cards is going to be aggregated across categories, across all these providers, and that I think US Bank laid it out the most clearly that it's to be in compliance with some federal requirement. So, I think just the spending data being aggregated and anonymized is the standard we should expect, not to have like Mary Ellen bought $5 worth of products from 7-Eleven.
Yeah. Something to note, US Bank mentioned being able to aggregate by demographics, but that would be an additional cost. They didn't say how much, but that's just something to take note of. I would hope that we could disaggregate across race and ethnicity and gender, just to be able to look at disparities and whatnot. I think that could be a good level of analysis. Yeah, to have
For direct cash assistance, we made it optional questions on demographic information folks wanted to share, and then we were able to link their accounts. So I don't like hearing that would have been an extra charge.
Yeah. But that's the only one that mentioned that. Something to consider.
Yeah, so I think they're able to, if we were to ask them to report stuff out by racial category, I mean, as long as they have that information to start with, then they can run a report for us, but they wouldn't be giving us raw data.
Yeah.
Or they won't be giving our evaluation partner raw data.
Yeah. And then the last category is just added value. This is more of a note. Mocafy talked about like a wealth building program to access their bank account. I just made note of that because they're the only ones that explicitly talked about an added value, a wealth building component. So I thought that was nice.
Or as part of their offering. I think there was one other theme talked about like other things they could do for an extra charge. So I think just to note, like this is what Mocafy said they would do for the amount of money that they're already charging.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Okay.
Any other points of discussion on this, or should I get to the scoring?
Go on.
Cool. Well, I'm gonna reshare. All right. Does everyone see this?
Yep.
Wonderful. So just like a quick explainer of the spreadsheet, on the left-hand side, we have the scoring categories and the points possible. The darker headings are the category scores, and then it goes through each of the items that fall under the scope of work. So service alignment, timeline breakdown, communications and reporting, so on and so forth, A through H. And then the other categories, proximity to St. Louis, costs, and our last category, which everyone scored differently, but it's diversity and business, essentially. Here we have all of our aggregate scores for each of the selection committee members, for all of them, for scope of work. And then proximity to St. Louis. Something that I think we should talk about is I looked at all of our average scores down below and did a quick little color heat map to see which one was the winner. I also did what we talked about last week, which was to see if removing the second category, the proximity to St. Louis, changed our overall scoring. And it looks like there's consistency in who was our lowest scored proposal and our highest scored proposal, even controlling for whether or not proximity to St. Louis would change the overall score. And then the last point of note that I wanted to talk about is that the proposals that we scored the most differently or had the highest standard deviation would be US Bank and 4 CTs. They had the highest standard deviation. So some of us probably scored them decently high, and then others scored them decently low. So that's something else to make note of. I'm going to pause and see if anyone had any thoughts about what the scores that we had, especially the two that had the most variation in scoring.
Do you know which categories accounted for the deviation the most?
No, I can check real quick. I guess what would be the easiest way to do this?
Probably not on screen.
Yeah, I thought I'd
Much
probably have
pressure,
to,
It's too much pressure.
I have to do. Do you want me to calculate it real quick? I can do it.
Sure. If I had to, if I can, I mean, I guess looking at that.
I mean, I think what's interesting is that when you take out proximity, like the two that were benefited by the proximity category were US Bank and Mokofi. So last time we talked about how maybe proximity wasn't as critical for this particular subcontract. I think what happens overall is US Bank becomes pretty comparable to Relevate, Beam, and Conduit. I mean, they both have their pros and cons over, there's differences between them, but it's a similar level of support, which is they're pretty comparable. Like they would all be good, fine partners. I think Mokofi just really benefited by the scoring strongly and uniquely strongly on the pro bono services. And I think there was one other one where they scored really, timeline. That was one that seemed to be missing. There was groups that just didn't really have strong timelines in their responses. So I think those were when I looked at like where they just scored much higher or than the other groups, applicants. That's why Mokofi kind of came out on top.
Yeah, I would agree, probably say that maybe communications and reporting had some degree of deviation as well as, like you were saying, the timeline breakdown for those two, or US and 4 CTs.
Yeah, I also agree. Thanks, James, for making it this way. It's a lot easier to understand where some strengths and weaknesses are.
Yeah, of course. Well, I do think that there's a clear winner. So I'm comfortable moving forward with a recommendation unless there's other points of discussion that people want to make.
I'm good.
If anyone would like to make a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Go for
Make
it.
a motion to go into contract negotiations with Mokofi.
Second.
Been properly moved and seconded. Ms. Gar, all in favor? We'll just do that.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. There. Okay, well, I guess we knocked out B and C, but I'll pause to see if there's any further discussion before we go into or before we adjourn. Or any other needs on your end as the quarterback, James?
I had a question, because I'll be asked about this by other people. So now, once you guys begin negotiations, all three are in negotiations, or are we, have we contracted with any of the three subcontract?
We're currently working with the other two. Nothing, those have not been finalized.
Okay.
Yeah, we're in the drafting process.
But the goal is to have them drafted, signed by school starts in in mid-August. So I know we're talking about like when the school year starts, that's the time period that we really wanted to launch the pilot.
Yeah, and barring any conflict during contract negotiations, we would hope that they could be on July or August.
Okay. And is part of, once all three have signed a contract, is there gonna be like a big powwow meeting?
Yeah,
This will work out because there's a lot, there gonna have to be some coordination between all three.
yep, and we are in the process of hiring a full-time program manager.
Right, and that too, that's very exciting.
Yeah, so that, I think that will help with the quarterbacking between, three different vendors. So hopefully we're able to find someone competitive for the role here shortly.
Okay, and that'll be the person that we call if there's questions
Yeah, Ghostbusters.
internally at the city.
Yes, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, I hope they're ready.
Right. Oh, the final point that I'm glad you mentioned, Treasure Lane, is I need conflict of interest forms from everyone for financial distribution RFP. So, yep.
Can you read on the form? I fill it out and
Yeah, I'll send it.
okay, but you have the other two.
Yep.
Great.
Thank you all.
I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in
Previous
favor?
roll.
Any objection to previous roll? Hearing none, we are adjourned. Thanks, everyone. Have a great weekend.
All right.
Thanks.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday.